Hello and welcome everyone to the second event of the new cycle of the Altering, Shifting, Communing Conversation series, which is a project presented and hosted by Call for Curators. I am Ilaria Conti, the curator of the series. And as many of you might know by now, this is a project that started earlier on this year to give visibility to curatorial practices that rethink critically, but also ethically, the role of curating. And what we're trying to do through these conversations is to create a space, a digital space, to rethink what we do in communal terms and also in conversation with each other, to present projects that are rooted in process and research, and to foster meaningful relationships with publics, artists, researchers, and the civil society at large. And what we also want to try and do is to explore formats of sustainability and independent curatorial practices. So we want to create ultimately a space for meaningful discourse, and as I always say, consider how we do things rather than just what we do. So for this new cycle, we will be hosting conversations every other Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Berlin time. So today I am very, very, very glad to have with me Bruno Leitāo. Hello, Bruno. Who is a curator and co-founder and curatorial director of HANGAR, Center for Artistic Research in Lisbon. So thanks again for being with us today. Just to set the framework of the conversation, we will speak for approximately 40 minutes. In the meantime, I invite everybody to ask questions through the comment section on YouTube and Facebook, and also to connect with us by email to share ideas, feedback, also as Bruno is speaking. And here we go. This is the email address to reach out to. So Bruno, again, hello and welcome. I know this is a very busy moment of the year for you, so I am very excited, but also very grateful for your presence. You know, I've been knowing you for some time. I've been following your practice for quite some time now. And I was really looking forward to having the chance to delve into your work, to discuss it with you, to discuss its ramifications in terms of focus and research. So as I always start, usually I ask people to introduce themselves. So I will do the same with you in your own words. And as you know, also, as I mentioned, the series of talks started during the pandemic. So the very first question that is important for me to ask, it was important back then, but I want to maintain it throughout, is really also, how are you? Where are you? And how have these past months been?
Hello, Ilaria. It's a pleasure to be here with you. You know that. Thank you so much for this invitation. I mean, I'm going to just present myself briefly because I do a lot of things, so I don't create any kind of confusion. Yes, I'm one of the co-directors of HANGAR. I live in between Lisbon and Madrid. And I can explain that later on, but I never stopped being also an independent curator, so I do my own projects, curatorial projects specifically in museums and even galleries. I work with a collection focused on African art, and I'm in Lisbon right now. I'm in HANGAR in one of the residency rooms. We're inaugurating an exhibition this week. So yeah, we're setting up the exhibition. And the situation here, well, here it's, sometimes you forget that compared to Madrid, where I spent most of the crisis, the Mars crisis, because now we're gonna have another one, it seems. Here you can almost forget that there's a global pandemic in a way, except for the tourists. There are no tourists anymore in Lisbon. But yeah, these are challenging times, and sometimes even traveling by car between Lisbon and Madrid, it's like you cannot do it. So yeah, that's very specific to our time, I guess. I mean, and it changes everything.
Of course. It is constantly changing, as you're saying. I'm currently in Italy, and it's pretty much the same thing. Things are getting complicated again, more and more so. So I totally hear you. So delving into our topics, as you mentioned in your introduction, you are one of the co-founders of HANGAR. So HANGAR is a contemporary art space that has been active for a few years now in Lisbon, as you said. And I thought it might be nice to just start from there somehow, and ask you how sort of you started this project, why it started, so what kind of needs it responded to in the first place, why you created an organization. It's not just a project, it's really a full-on organization with its challenges and processes and life cycles and so on. So I wanted to ask you to talk to us a little bit about that. And then from there, as you said, we can move on like in a rhizomatic way to discuss all the other amazing curatorial projects you're leading.
Well, HANGAR was born in 2015, actually 2014, but it opened to the public 5 years ago. And it's called HANGAR Center for Artistic Research. And that is because we wanted, since the beginning, to do some things a little bit different than what we were used to, especially specifically here in Lisbon. And we wanted to have researchers, curators, artists, and even the audience at the same table. So that's why we have that name. And we incorporated research in various types of research, of what one can understand as research, into the mainframe of HANGAR. In the beginning, we started out from the history of Lisbon, and it still is the focus of our attention. I mean, Lisbon is a city that had an overwhelming importance in the trafficking of human beings in the world, and in a way did the triangulation between Africa and the Americas in Europe. But no one at the time was, well, there were projects addressing that, but we felt that something more could be added to the discussion. Actually, when we started this project, I thought, well, this can become quite fashionable, this kind of colonial critique. So we'll be one of many. 5 years later, we now have the extreme right in Parliament here in Portugal. A very racially tense situation. Well, compared to other countries, not so much, of course, but it's a bit of a surprise in a country like Portugal. But we still, I think that our purpose is more valid than ever, in a sense. There's a lot to be discussed. There's a lot of connections to Latin America and to African countries that we need to kind of look into in a critical way, especially. So yeah, that was the origin of HANGAR. And apart from that, it was it was a kind of an utopia, We had very little means. We had just our ideas to back on, and a kind of ethics of working, a way of working. So yeah, and we wanted to drive it away from this kind of spectacular art centers with blockbuster exhibitions. Even today, we have a little bit more funds, but we still do reduced size exhibitions, either solo projects or small group shows. We have exhibitions, we have residencies, we have research. We now have music also and sound. So it keeps on growing. And from the beginning, we decided that I was going to be between Lisbon and Madrid, because first we didn't see that we could live, I mean the directors, we couldn't live out of HANGAR. It was going to be something that we were going to do, but it was not going to sustain us. And that was okay. And when the time came to be more sustainable in a way, we decided to, instead of getting better paychecks, that this is the truth, we decided to hire more people. So as to kind of like do different other ideas that we still had and expand HANGAR further. So that's why I kept on curating other shows outside of HANGAR for my own interests. Also here we are 3 directors, so that means that it's 3 making decisions. What I'm curating is just me. Well, did I answer your question?
Definitely, and I love that you jumped right into, I think, 2 topics that are very important to the conversation series. One, which we will address further later on, is that of sustainability. Like, how does an amazing project like this and your curatorial practice sustain itself? And how many Brunos have there to be, in a day in order to sustain all of this? And also the other is that of horizontality, the fact that you have an institution, an organization that brings other people in rather than accumulating or polarizing more resources in the staff members that are already present. And the fact that there's 3 of you, again, it's kind of a very interesting democratic, system, at least, to articulate decision-making, thinking, and so on differently. It's not just 1 head, it's not even 2, which is a system that we might have seen elsewhere, and it's very interesting. It's 3, which makes it, I guess, for many other people would be impossible to manage for a variety of reasons, from personality issues to sort of vision of the institution. But it's interesting because I guess it gives a different meaning to the term plurality in the context of HANGAR, I assume, no?
Yeah, yes. I mean, the team is very, it's very horizontal. I mean, the decision making between, we are now actually 5 people,
okay,
full time, because it's the 3 directors, and then the coordinator. We are fortunate enough to have a coordinator of residencies right now and a producer. And but yeah, this the decision making between 3 directors means that we have different backgrounds. I was trained as an artist and then as a curator. Monica Miranda comes from research, and she's an artist. So actually, this structure, if it wasn't for me, it would be an artist-led project. But there's a curator inside, so it's completely. But it's very different sensibilities, and that is difficult, of course, to manage very different approaches. But it's also what gives us what keeps us collaborating together, because we sense that from agonism we get something unexpected, even for us. And we're always moving. I mean, like I said, since we had no our own funds, we are always moving and always shifting without losing character, in a way.
That's great. So, and then let's focus on another element that you already mentioned that I think is really key to your work, but also is, as you pointed out before, reflected in the name of HANGAR, right? HANGAR is called Center for Artistic Research, which is very specific. And so I want to talk of that, of artistic research. So it is very central to your practice, but I would like to ask you how you understand this term of, what is, in your opinion, artistic research, or how you articulate that, and also what lines of investigation you've been engaging with as a curator through that, and to what kind of projects have led. We were talking before the beginning of the talk about the fact that it is a very specific type of practice. It is a practice that now is spread more and more, and of course it takes on different meanings, different geolocalities, different qualities depending on where it's developed. But I would love to hear your perspective on this, and also how you have worked through it over time somehow.
Well, research. artistic research is several things here, what that means in the name of HANGAR, but one is obvious. We have researchers here working with us, helping us with content. We have agreements with the Center for Comparative Studies here in Lisbon. They're experts on African culture. With Train at the University of London through Paul Goodwin. I mean, they're experts on Latin America and African culture. So we get feedback from them. But in practical terms, what it means is that, for instance, we had exhibitions that I curated, and I wrote a text, of course, and I presented the exhibition, and I did all this kind of work that the curator does. But then we invited experts in different areas to talk to the artists. So that means that you go and find resources and you work with people, sometimes in a very steady way, that can add something else to the discussion, and not try to centralize everything in the figure of this kind of all-powerful curator that can speak about everything. So this kind of collaboration and taking a step back as a curator and letting other types of experts speaking is it's very important to me as a curator on a personal level, but also it's a little bit the MO of here at HANGAR. And also there's other aspects to this kind of artistic research. It meant different things for us. We do residencies and we push for a lot of experimentation instead of finished products. The exhibitions we do here, especially when there are solo shows, and that means the artists sometimes produce new work, or most of the times they produce new work specifically for this exhibition. We push the artists to do something that they would not do in other spaces like museums or galleries, to push the boundaries of even their own experimentation and their practice, and to be a little bit more free in a way. So, and that led to some very interesting results. I mean, you can visit online the exhibition of Kiluanji Kia Henda that we did here, and we did an island made out of bricks to talk about something very specific that was like the problem of refugees and migrants in Europe. So this keeps the place very dynamic in a way. And yeah, then there's the research that has to do with, we did seminars here in HANGAR. For instance, we did a seminar called Peninsula, where we invited curators, historians, researchers, artists, and even artists to speak about curatorial practices that have to do with coloniality here in Portugal and in Spain. To work in a kind of comparative way, and then, but that's very, very strict. So to work besides that, and that's going to be edited. That's something that transcends a little bit HANGAR. That's going to be edited in the form of a book that me and Carlos Garrido Castellano, the other editor, are preparing through Wales University Press. That was supposed to have come out already, but because of COVID and everything, it's being delayed to the end of the year. But where we have this 16 people writing about experiences around curating and coloniality in Portugal and Spain since the 80s until now. I mean, yeah. So research is a lot of different things.
I really think it's great to hear you talk about how different forms of knowledge developed either through artistic practice or through academic practice or forms of activism kind of speak to one another, and how you're bringing them all together. And you kind of ended on this question of, or issue of coloniality, which was spot on, because that's the subject of my very next question. And that's what I really am interested in talking about and delving further and further into throughout this conversation series. It is something that we have addressed throughout since we started, but I wanted to mention that the previous talk, so the talk we hosted 2 weeks ago for the ALT SHIFT COMM series, was with a project called Conversations in Gondwana, which works on South-South collaborations across former colonies, so South America and Africa. And as you said, as a curator, you've been based between Lisbon and Madrid. And so your practice is really in strong and direct conversation with these geographies that bear very strong colonial history. So somehow on the other side of this historical path. So I wanted to ask you further, kind of, if we could chat a little bit more about how you've been addressing these issues of European coloniality, or colonialities, perhaps I should say, how this has shaped your practice. And again, if you could talk to us or guide us further through some of the projects, that you have developed, because it seems to me, as you were saying before, that it is a subject that is picking up a lot of attention, but it is also a subject that has endless complexities. It is a very complex subject. And so I feel that each artistic process or curatorial process really then articulates a different entry point or perspectives through this lens. So I would love to hear more about how you've been thinking about this, what strategies also for decolonial research, because the question of decoloniality goes also through how you structure research, right? How you structure artistic presentations and so on, how that has informed, the practice, and through this, how you've been articulating this subject of coloniality.
Well, it's we could go on for hours. The thing is, just methodology-wise, and I want to refer to a book that it's been edited here in HANGAR. It was the first book edited here in HANGAR by my colleague Monica Miranda, and it's called Atlântica, and it was a survey on Angolan artists. And the way that she did it brilliantly is that she did it as a kind of more like an academic publication than a catalog. That means that we had 14 artists, and then for each artist, she gathered the scientific committee, and that scientific committee arranged that 14 artists were going to be paired with 14 either curators, researchers, historians, etc. Those texts would go through the scientific committee in a blind site. So this is not the natural process of art books. Mm-hmm. It's more it's kind of like taking the academy into pulling it a little bit into outside of the academy, into the arts discussion, and also doing a little bit of the opposite. So yeah, this is referring to just talk about methodology, and but also another example. And you see, I'm European. I'm aware of all the privileges that coincide in me. So I do a lot of projects where I take a step back and let people talk for themselves. I would never talk for a woman, for instance. And so when the book that I'm editing with Carlos Garrido Castellano is Spanish researcher, we're doing it in a way that we're talking about analyzing not coloniality in the sense that we're discussing. Of course, we're discussing critically the colonial past of Portugal and Spain, but not everybody else. I mean, we can speak about the history of curating these kind of subjects, and we can treat it critically, but you have to be very mindful of where the kind of authority you have to speak of this matters. So, yeah, we kind of we speak from our standpoints and from what we can speak of, and then we invite experts from other countries to speak about those countries.
Yes.
So, this is kind of central
to the process.
Same, yes. Yes.
And in staying on this question, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned again, but we touched briefly upon, and through, I think that the example of, excuse me, Atlantica is a wonderful example, and the example that you gave of the new book that will be coming out soon, I hope, is a great opportunity to understand how you are looking for specific lines through which to articulate the discourse. You're not tackling the bigger issue, which is a very theoretical and an academic one. And so it's something that one could get lost into, perhaps without really being able to not only make a statement, but articulate a form of thinking that has radicality and specificity, therefore. But instead, you're trying to articulate specific lines of connection through, Portugal and Spain with Africa and with South America. And so I wanted to ask you, for instance, we've spoken many times about Lusophone Africa. Like, we've talked about certain elements that are particularly generative in, when activated in the process of artistic research. So I just wanted to ask you if you could, for those who might not know really your practice that well, if you could just mention also perhaps some of these elements, how you're thinking about this relationship with, certain countries in Africa, certain practitioners rather, or certain aspects of South American history that relate to your locality, the place in which you root your practice.
Yes, well, it's a very complicated question. The thing is, we do this through the partnerships that we have in these countries, like URRA in Argentina or Pescaus in Angola, and we collaborate on a one-to-one basis on the same level, and we build projects together. That's how we do it. We prepare the conditions for this kind of discussions. Sometimes it's not me raising the voice about something, it's just creating the specific conditions so somebody can speak about it. And
that's great.
And that's the most important part of it, I think.
And we will talk further about your network of collaborations, because I think it's pretty amazing. And it really, as you're saying, it kind of exemplifies the work methodology. It speaks for itself in that sense. So following up on this, I wanted to bring forward another interesting project that you have been leading, which is called For Art's Sake. And it is a collecting endeavor that somehow goes beyond the very definition of collection, and also works to support artists from Africa, from its diasporas, and operates also on the local ecosystems. So I wanted to ask you whether you can guide us through this project, its activities and vision. And as I always do, I will also share the link for those who might be interested in having a look while we speak or after the conversation. I think it's interesting. It's a beautiful website, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, FIS, as we call it, is it's a very interesting project in the sense that it's kind of like a little bit of it's completely private endeavor, civil society moving around an idea. And I was approached by a group of collectors that they were collectors in their own rights, I mean, individually, but they share some common interests. So they approached me me and another colleague, Sofia Costa Freire, to create this kind of collection around African art. And we said, okay, but I mean, collecting it's not only, or it's not just acquiring works. We want to do scholarships. We want to support the local art scene. We want to support researchers researching on African art. And I was expecting them to say, oh, no, we just want to buy. But they said, oh, great, that's great. And so we started out this very a bit crazy project. And so to explain it in a simple way, I mean, FIS is a collection, but it's much more than that. It's a collection on African art. That means that we are acquiring pieces and artworks from every country in Africa. But then there's a specific interest for the first years in Angola and Mozambique. So we do specific kind of work, and mostly in Angola. And what we do is that we, for instance, this late, the last initiative that we did, and you can see it online on the website, it's called PACA, which is an acronym for platform, it's in Portuguese, but it's Support Platform for Angolan Contemporary Creation. And what we did was we attributed, it's supposed to come out in the next few days, the results of the jury. And we did this kind of micro bursaries for artists that are working without being able to leave their studios. I mean, it was specifically created in March because of the COVID crisis. So we invited Elvira Diangane Ose, and she was kind enough to be in the jury with us. And we had 54 candidacies for 10, and then we can only award this time 10 bursaries. So this is one aspect of it, but there's others. I mean, we support books that further the knowledge on African art. We have an ongoing program for African curators to be able to do kind of residencies in European institutions as a kind of interchange. And this is, I have to stress a little bit, I'm a big proponent of curatorial residencies, because we do a lot of artist residencies here in Hangar. But I think when you send an artist to another country, is a little bit, acts a little bit like a self-contained unit. He furthers his knowledge on something, he gets new ideas, he has this kind of exchange, people get to know his work. It's really wonderful in that sense. But when you send a curator, you're sending all the artists that work with him, and you're letting him know other artists locally, whatever he goes. So it's very interesting. He acts like a kind of a sponge, but he also gives a lot to the place where he goes. So yeah, we started this program in March, and we had to abort it for the time being. But the idea is to have an Angolan curator doing a residency here in Hangar, and then in Gasworks for 1 month, and then in a French institution for 1 month. So yeah, it's much more than a collection. Yeah,
that's great. That's wonderful, because I think it ties very nicely also with the next question I had prepared, which is relating to the fact that all of our practices, of course, do not happen in a vacuum. We know that very, very well. And we need a whole system and sets of infrastructures in order for it to make it happen and to be sustainable. And so that's where I wanted to go, which is the issue of sustainability, the question of sustainability. I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about, for instance, Hangar, and how it was meant to be a project that didn't have pre-existing funds, and still you managed to make it happen. But because of that, then you need to sustain a whole other set of practices, and those, I'm sure, need funding as well. And so it becomes this enormous network of, keeping things in balance. And so I wanted to ask you if you could talk to us a little bit about the challenges and the complexities you have to face to sustain this type of curatorial practice in Hangar, but beyond, of course, in your own curatorial practice as well.
Yeah.
Especially because it's not just about working with an artist, ensuring that the artist produces a nice, pretty object, as you were saying, and then just putting it out there. It takes time. It's about processes. It's about perspectives. It's about research. So it's time-consuming and resource-consuming somehow. So I wanted to ask you about this, and also I wanted to ask you not only where you are now with that, but how your thinking on it has changed. Because of course, as you evolve through your practice and your career, you realize different things, or you take different things with you, no, when thinking about this question of sustainability.
Yeah, well, I think to put it in simple terms, you're talking about two types of sustainability. That is the person sustainability, the curator, this individual,
Yes.
and then projects like HANGAR. I mean, I started out, we started HANGAR with me having doing all these different projects because of that, but not just because of that. And then when it came the time to completely focus on HANGAR, we decided otherwise. I mean, Monica, she's an artist. She's still an artist. She's producing amazing work right now. I mean, we had a slump because, I mean, in the beginning, I was curating the exhibition, painting the wall, hanging the works, doing the guided tour in the opening, and then I would go into the bar and sell drinks. So that doesn't happen anymore.
Yes.
But I mean, it's very tricky to grow as an institution like this with no back to fall on. Well, we managed to do that. I mean, COVID is a very big test to our ability. It becomes very complicated because we have different types of funding. Most of the funding for production and for programming comes from contests that we win every year from the Ministry of Culture here in Portugal and others. And that keeps on going well. We keep on winning, but then the structure is supported by the agreements that we have with different institutions through many forms, but mostly through residencies. Of course, now we don't have residencies, or we have little residencies. So the sustainability of the projects is shifting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, I'm not an expert in macroeconomics, but if I was, I think economists now should be looking at what happened in a period like, say, World War II to understand how after World War II, we got back on our feet again. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have the Marshall Plan and all that, but what else? The problem right now with COVID is that we're still in the storm. It's not a fast. So it's we keep having to adapt, and it's challenging. But I think we've been adapting in HANGAR since the beginning. I mean, we had to create our own ways of finding funding and keep this project going, and that will continue. And that's a real challenge. I mean, but on a personal level, I mean, yeah, it started out like this because I didn't want HANGAR to be my sole provider, and all the others thought the same. But then it became a modus operandi for me to get this kind of. It became my way of being in touch with the world and opening my minds continuously and educating myself, because 5 years ago, it was a very different art scene here in Lisbon. It was very, very, very small, and it's changed very rapidly, and it became much more cosmopolitan. And fortunately, we had a lot of people coming from other places, some for the worst reasons, like we have a lot of people from Brazil, a lot of amazing curators and artists living here now that's had to flee this Bolsonaro history. Yes. So it's unfortunate for him, but it's good for the art team here. We get this amazing exchange. I think a lot of them are going to stay here. We work with a lot of people from not Portuguese. And everything we do in HANGAR, just so you can understand a little bit of our mindset, we do open calls, for instance, for residencies, for Portuguese artists. And then in the end, we get one Brazilian, one Angolan, and one Portuguese. Because we always consider nationality, and this is mandatory for all the supports that we have from institutions and foundations. We explain them. If you're going to send us Spanish artists, for instance, that means that we're going to open the open call, the candidacy, to artists that are from Spain or that live and work in Spain, even though they're not from Spain. So this kind of idea of expanded nationality is very important for us, and that's one of the main points of working and creating a kind of going back to this kind of the colonial aspects of our working. As regards to funding, I mean, we have to see what's going to happen. But as a curator or as director, you have to keep moving. You have to keep moving and find ways that are meaningful, that can bring you some sustainability.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The challenge is real, I guess, for everybody.
Yes. We can speak in a few months and see what happened next, or in a few years. But yeah, we're working on it constantly. We created a new version of the website for HANGAR. It's HANGAR Online. We did a lot of programming so that we could sustain this lifeline to artists, so that we could still hire them to do presentations and show their work online, which is one of the ways of doing it. It's not the best, or it's open for discussion, and it's sometimes problematic, but it's one of the ways of keep this kind of wheel turning, because we have a lot of collaborators besides the five of us. We work constantly with local curators here. I mean, I used to do all the conversations with the residences, all the kind of mentorship. And as soon as we got a little bit more funds, we started hiring curators that are now in Lisbon, and they're freelance. We work with people constantly, with people say, such as Cristiana Tejo, Brazilian curator living here and doing an amazing work. We've worked with her constantly, and she's even opening her own space right now. So yeah, we see collaboration as a way of growing up, of growing, expanding, and of bettering our work, if this line can be said. Yeah.
Of course. And this was pretty much my last question. As usual, time is running up very quickly. So I encourage everybody who's watching to ask any questions, if they have any for Bruno, through the comment section. But I wanted to get you to talk a little bit further, just maybe for a couple of minutes, since you already touched upon it, but on the value and sort of how conversations and collaborations really shape the practice. It's like a two-way type of movement, because research-based practices require presence and conversations and long-term processes and relationships. So it is a work that is not just about knowledge, it's really rooted in people somehow, right? So through the relationships, also the practice takes shape, in one way or another. And so one way in which we tend to close this conversation series, every one of these talks, is really by also thinking that this is an opportunity to amplify the work of others, right? As you were saying, when a curator comes to HANGAR for a residency, he brings the entire network of relationships and of knowledge, that person has accumulated over time. So in that light, this is also a platform for people who are watching that might not really know. You've mentioned some amazing artists, some amazing organizations in Argentina, in Angola, and so on. But I wanted really to ask you for 1 minute further to just tell us more about how these collaborations and conversations are shaping the practice, your individual practice, not just that of HANGAR. And if there is any practitioner that you feel is really either you are in direct conversation with, or that somehow resonates, directly or indirectly with the work you do. And we will, as always, we will gather these names and informations and put them on the page of the talk so that people can have a look beyond, the video.
Yeah, look, I find inspiration in a lot of different people, and even projects that are very different from ours. We do collaborations here in Lisbon. We started out collaborating first with people abroad, and then we kind of came home in this collaboration. I mean, and I think one of the collaborations. I mean, we've collaborated with even commercial galleries here for residencies, like Madragoa, Galeria Madragoa here in Portugal, the MAT, which is a museum on a different level. We hosted talks over there that we couldn't host here. They were too big for HANGAR. And even recently, and this is kind of paradigmatic of our very practical vision, we collaborated with Kunsta Lisbon. They're an older institution than we are. They do an amazing work here in Portugal, but they're very different from us. But we found common interests in a specific program that was done also in collaboration or fostered even by Kadist from Paris. So we got all these institutions together to do the Sensing Salon with Valentina Desiderio and Denise Ferreira da Silva here in HANGAR, but it was actually, we hosted it, but it was a collaboration by all these three institutions, and it was actually curated by Natasha Petersin Bachelet. So yeah, I think this is kind of like the most outrageous collaborations since we are so different. And it's funny, it's kind of like we started collaborating with people outside of Portugal, and in the end, no. Recently, we've worked with people here in Portugal. But yeah, we're always finding common interests, even with people who work differently from us. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Bruno. So I see some comments, which I will show you at the end of the talk, that compliment you and so on and so forth.
Okay.
No questions. People are a bit shy tonight, which I totally get. It's fine. So then, without further ado, I will, since we're hitting the hour, I thank you very much for your time and for all this amazing knowledge that you've been sharing with us. I encourage everyone really to have a look again at the website of HANGAR. Here we go, and then you will find all these links, and for art's sake as well. And I've been compiling all the notes about the names and amazing projects that you've been mentioning, so people will be able to have a look and go back to them on our page. Since we're just showing a bunch of links, why not the page of the talk? So Bruno, thank you again. You've been very generous, especially since you have a show coming up at HANGAR, if I am correct. Yes. So I encourage everybody to go to the website and read more about that, since we haven't had the chance to really delve into that project. And I remind everybody else that we will be back on Tuesday, the 8th of October. Now we're skipping 2 weeks at 6 p.m. Berlin time, and we will announce our speaker in the coming days. So for whoever wants to subscribe to the newsletter, this is the website, the one that you read here. And again, to share ideas, if anybody has questions for Bruno, we're always very happy to connect and share sort of after the talk questions. Sure. For those who might need some warm-up time to prepare their questions, this is the email address to send it to, and we'll be happy to pass it on. So thanks again, Bruno.
Thank you so much for this invitation, Milady. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
For me as well. So bye-bye for now, and take care until soon, hopefully.
Bye-bye.